This is Jeff King. Welcome to the second Red and Blue Cybersecurity Podcast in 2023. We are excited about this topic today. The podcast format is actually going to go really quick. We end up working about 40 minutes on a hot cybersecurity topic. Hopefully, all these tips will help build your cybersecurity strategies and be able to guide you through this particular day. Today's speakers are, let's start with Laurie. Hey, Laurie, this is great to have you on. You're the Director of Cloud Security Strategies and Engineering for Elevance Health.
I am. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, and I thank you so much for inviting me. I do need to note as a disclaimer that I'm here representing my own views on these topics, and I don't represent Elevance Health specifically on their views.
Oh, thanks. Okay, great. And Robesh, you're part of the Zelle digital payment network. Give us a little perspective. That must be some wild times right now, too.
Hi, Jeff. Good morning, and thank you for inviting me. Great to be here to have the conversations on OWASP and MITRE. Yeah, Zelle is growing really quickly, and there are a lot of good things that we are doing. Just want to add like a disclaimer from my side as well. I'm here to share my personal experiences, and I'm not representing Zelle or everyone in the network. These are my opinions.
Great. Well, thanks for that. Great to have you on. And back for a second appearance. Appreciate Joe being with us. And congratulations. I had to scratch out my notes here. You just got elevated to the Chief Revenue Officer at Lightstream. So thanks for joining us again today. Your perspective certainly in implementing a lot of these different tools are invaluable for our audience.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Lightstream, as you know, is a security integrator on the network, cloud, and security side. So I have a distinct advantage of implementing across thousands of other organizations and getting valuable insights and telemetry from integration standpoint. Some of the use cases, what we see that's out of the norm, some of the things that we can scale at best. So very unique perspective that I bring to the table. Also, prior to CRO and stuff like that, extensive engineering background as well, doing everything these guys are doing, right? So happy to provide some insights around it.
All right, so we've got the health care, we've got healthcare insurance, we've got the digital payment, and your wide expanse of knowledge for this topic. Today's topic is a deep dive into OWASP and MITRE attack frameworks, which, I mean, talk about this March 1, so that we're in March madness here because those two topics can add up to an awful lot of intriguing developments. Well, when you talk about OWASP, I mean, that for other people out there, it's Open Web Application Security Project. It's kind of like the March Madness of all the vulnerability attacks out there. It's an open source type of program that gives people or gives all of the community a chance to let people know what the latest vulnerability, unfortunately, popular vulnerability attacks are out there. And then just for the MITRE attack concept, that's adversarial techniques and common knowledge. And that is actually something that guides a lot of our professionals in being able to deal with preventing cyber attacks. So that gives us a little perspective of that. To start with, why... Joe, I'll give this to you. Why is OWASP considered the best-in-class standard for app security?
Yeah, so it's a very open source kind of a framework around it, and picking, some of these top 10 lists do change based on what we see in the attack vector side of things. But mostly it's because the exploitation of software flow, the the complexity of applications that's relying on third-party libraries and speed and scale that's integration with the DevOps and what makes it vulnerable from an attack perspective, right? So these are some of the frameworks that everybody mostly follows. There's a framework around MITRE, and then there's cyber kill chain as well. That is sort of like there are distinct differences, but also have some commonalities between each other as well around those two framework as well. But then you have organizations that utilize these framework that actually with the enterprise execution. So they might follow exactly some of these framework, or some a lot of them actually takes parts of it, do it well, some don't do it well, some try to follow as prescriptive as possible, but it gives them a baseline, right? Everything are on framework, right? Everything that goes with framework, it's all about increasing the having a baseline and then evolving from the baseline, integrating into your organization, because some of the things are very unique to your organizations, and building that unique framework that works for you, right? But again, all of these are becoming changing. Prioritizations are changing quite a bit, as well as attack surface management is increasing, and new technologies are coming into play now. AI, all of these things are happening. There's a lot of room for improvement, also room for another attack vector from synthetic data and so forth, and going even deeper, right? But again, a lot of the same issues still exist. Software exploitation, 9 out of 10. Official container images, even in Docker Hub, have more than 50 vulnerabilities today, right? So there's a lot of top risks that still contain sensitive data exposure, weekend access controls, and so forth, right? Which Rupesh and Lori can talk much deeper into it, as they are active practitioners in operational level. So, but I wanted to set the stage, like,
Yeah.
these are all the frameworks that everybody should follow at minimum. If you don't have a program set together, then build a program around it, because it is a programmatic approach on developing a true security program around OWASP and MITRE framework attacks.
So, Lori and Robesh, did you go to school to learn OWASP, or did they just have to dive in and understand everything?
I did actually. I went to Harvard for my master's degree in information technology, and that was one of the courses that was very heavily focused on OWASP, yes, and also MITRE attack framework. Looked into that, and multiple other pen testing solutions that were available that that people are using these days that we need to be aware of. I think the biggest thing though is, to the point of what Joe just shared, these frameworks are changing over time. So it's important to keep up on them, because as one example, in 2017, broken access control was not at the top of the list, and it is now. And that's something that's hugely important, because people often don't understand the level of risk that having unnecessary access, manual access, actually does, the risk that it presents to its own company, or whether it's a startup or an enterprise or whatever. Having unfettered access, unmonitored, untracked, unaudited access can be hugely, hugely problematic. And these are all things that I think it's very important to keep in mind in building out a good program. And then, of course, the MITRE attack framework also allows you to test that and make sure that you did what you thought you did.
So, Robesh, from the standpoint of all these the cloud apps and the APIs, is this a useful way to guide your protection and looking for vulnerabilities?
Yeah, I think even if you're switching to emerging technologies or using existing technologies, I think at the fundamental level, the baseline of controls that you build, the best practices that you incorporate by using OWASP and MITRE still help you establish that strong foundation. So OWASP and MITRE, like Joe was mentioning and Robbie was also mentioning, like, yeah, they are evolving and adapting to meet with the emerging technology changes. We now have like attack vectors for container specific technology. We have something for SaaS based solutions as well. But again, these are based out of the baseline of MITRE attacks frameworks that we are using for evaluating the controls. And same thing with the OWASP as well. These are based out of best practices. Like, hey, you shift to left, you make sure that when you are building something from scratch, you are incorporating security into your design and architecture. So it starts there and it helps you validate the output of the product that you are building is secured and you could evaluate using that.
So it'd be interesting from Lori and Robesh's standpoint of when you wake up in the morning, do you go right to seeing if there's some kind of change happening in either one of these tools and or alerts and does your day just start off with a bing 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 bing?
Well, my day begins pretty much with simply making sure that we're adhering to what we're supposed to adhere to, right?
Yeah.
Specifically, I and my team to make sure, it's obviously not just broken access control that would be a concern in terms of, the OWASP recommendations and standards. We also have some very specific guidelines that we need to adhere to in terms of insecure design, which is actually a new topic for OWASP, since the last 2017 edition. It's a really important to understand and implement that, because that affects everything from your access controls that you put in place to, network, whether that's going to be access based on network or IAM or APIs or whatever type of access it is. It's not just the access itself, it's also what other configurations you have there. So all of the above, whether it's insecure design, whether it's security misconfigurations, these are all things that, I think any good company, both in my previous experience and, in any experience that I've ever had, any good company typically does have good logging in place. So a good place for anyone to start, I think, would be to look at their logs and to see if there's any modifications there.
Well, that gets to the point of being able to get into the attacker's mentality. So,
right.
Joe, I mean, from your standpoint, you're implementing a lot of these things. I mean, is that something you encourage your clients to actually say, "Hey, you got to be really on top of this stuff."
Absolutely, right. So, yeah, so customers comes in all sizes and all caliber from a resource perspective. Our goal is to educate and be that trusted advisor to the client on giving them advice on like some of the basics. It all varies, right? Because especially over the last couple of years, we had calibers of people jumping ship and going into the organizations that are super mature to immature. All these things are happening. But what I've been seeing is, I think the next 12 to 24 months, there's going to be, what we are seeing is a lot of maturity on basic hygiene. A lot of the things that Lori just talked about, Rupesh just talked about, utilizing OWASP framework from a security logging and monitoring failures. I mean, those are some of the basic things that people should get it right, right? Any new technologies that come into play, any cloud deployment or Kubernetes or microservices that you're building or cyber service mesh, everything needs to be logged. Without log, you have no understanding of your current state of your environment for you to actually do a proper investigation around it. You don't know if your adversaries have compromised the environment. You have to have that compromised already kind of an approach and start digging through it and having that baseline. So what we are seeing in the market from a client perspective, a lot of them are improving their basic hygiene. A lot of them are struggling as well, not truly understanding some of the micro decisions they're making and how it impacts their macro strategy. And with that kind of emotion, we are trying to help as much as possible, even through this podcast, right? We are looking at ways to improve the for our engineers that's out there all over the place to really take some of this information and learn from it and start doing some of the basic things from a framework perspective and evolve from there. Are they going to 100% get it right? Or people are going to 100% get it right in general? No. But the idea is slowing down an attack to mitigate broader impacts, right? It's risk based kind of an approach on how you execute a security strategy, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So a lot of what I'm hearing is that this is not a one-time thing. It's a continuous,
Absolutely.
everyday type of practice. The attacks and some of the framework that you've talked about within your probably in 2023, some things have even changed as far as the weight and severity of your day. And when you go ahead and attack or develop attack strategies with your red team groups, each time it's a different experiment and that's interesting. So just like it'd be interesting to hear from how you build that attack readiness type of scenario with each one of your red teams and blue teams. I assume each one of you have some of those kind of team members on your staff. Lori, maybe you could start with us.
Sure. So in my experience in the past, I've often worked with red and blue teams. And I think, the first step is always, of course, to make sure that you have not only outlined the specific, say, 10 OWASP principles that you're attempting to follow, but also exactly how you're attempting to follow that, right? It's not enough to just say that we're going to adhere to these principles. You have to have an actual strategy for how you're going to do that, which is often where the engineering piece comes into the strategy. You have to be able to lay out, how did we enforce secure design? We have these controls in this place. What happens if we try to compromise that? So I think having your strategy first built out very well and documented is the first step. Right? You have to have that documented. You have to have noted for the people who are then going to be performing tests on it, what they should and should not be able to do so that they're clear on that. And then the second step, of course, is to build out from the strategy that you've carefully documented and identified and probably tested yourself, hopefully, deliver that to the team that's going to test that, who may have some knowledge of how you've set up, but possibly not the same level of knowledge that you have. But they do know that the controls you have in place, they know what they should not be able to do. And then it's up to them to be able to use the MITRE framework, MITRE attack framework, and possibly even, additional tools that they have at their fingertips to be able to try to compromise what you say you've built.
Okay. Robesh, you talked a little bit about the shift left concept in your operation and getting these kind of vulnerabilities way before they become an issue in your organization. Can you kind of talk a little bit about how that is evolved in our industry?
Sure. Yeah, I think shift left is an approach that is gaining popularity because it reduces the amount of time that you are spending in fixing things. A lot of times when issues are identified as early as possible before something is used by your consumers, it takes a lot less time to fix those issues. So shift left is not just an approach for security teams to do, it's actually a culture shift across the organization. And I think one thing is really important for any security program to be effective. It needs buy-in from your stakeholder teams, like whether it's your technology team, your engineering teams, or architecture teams. So security needs to be really integrated as part of their process, and we should be able to incorporate like the OWASP best practices as early as possible, even before somebody starts like coding up for a certain application. Everybody should be aware of like, hey, what are the OWASP best practices, how they could be incorporated. And using frameworks like MITRE is a way to evaluate like, hey, whether you're doing a good job of incorporating these best practices, or are there like gaps that you need to address. So I think it's more shift left and also validate right that gives you a feedback loop to make continuous improvements and make sure that your program is like being effective.
Okay. Joe, when we talk a little bit about the technologies, some of the, I'm hearing continuous, I'm hearing shift left. there it really speaks to using some automation in there, because the industry was in a lot of cases doing a lot of manual pen testing before this. Give us a little perspective of the change between automation and the manual pen testing that you see in the industry.
Yeah, for sure, right? So, traditionally organizations have been utilizing pen testing after the fact of development life cycle, right? More on the shift right side of things. Before going production or after going production, in some cases, I don't know. Depends on the type of maturity with the organization and their digital transformation in general, which is very manual, which is very lengthy, because now you're talking about, like, I'm not saying pen testing should not be manual. There should be an element of manual pen testing that needs to occur if you're doing like wire scrapping and you're grabbing data and doing man in the middle attacks and stuff like that. There is a place and purpose for it. Depends on how deep you want to go, right?
Yeah.
However, majority of the software lifecycle management happening today, from grabbing data, code, open source, the type of development, which is like 70% or so, is what I hear nowadays from a software development standpoint. And things are moving so significantly fast. The tools like even tools like Prancer, right, which has SAST, and which is static application security testing, and DAST, which is dynamic application security testing, can be incorporated into the development lifecycle, enabling that shift left methodology. This also means like doing security checks are conducted early in the software development lifecycle, allowing teams to identify the vulnerabilities and fix them before it can be exploited. Now, this has to be integrated into the pipelines, right? If you don't do pipeline, if you don't build up the right pipeline, if you're still doing traditional monolithic type of architecture and try to incorporate do a bolt-on type of security, those days are gone, right? Those days are really gone. People have to really shift. I feel like I've been saying this for the last 10 years, but I feel like I still have to say this. Uh, Only because while things are improving in the security organization, as security engineers and analysts and architects are catching up or getting better at it,
Yeah.
we need to like shift all these conversation into the developer organization as well, and bringing them into the fold, or incorporating some of these tools in the developer organization. That way they can learn and integrate and fix and change the development methodology itself, right? Coding is one thing, but you have to validate, right? Just like you're compiling. I mean, I come from engineering, from doing C sharp, going into Python, ROR, and stuff like that. So I have a full understanding from what it takes to build. Now introducing pipelines is where we need to like improve some of these proactive steps. So using Prancer has these capabilities from automated testing standpoint, which I think will reduce significantly, which is one of a kind, right? It's very unique. I haven't seen anybody do this from an automated standpoint in the market segment. So very
Yeah.
unique from automated cloud testing, code testing, and also doing ISE, right? Really scanning the ISE to identify security issues on the infrastructure configuration side of things as well, which can be addressed before the deployment. So we don't need to like wait, scan, and process and push it through. Sure, there are some other tools that have been around for a long time, but from an automation standpoint, I think this is one of the newest ones for sure.
Well, Laura, you talked a little bit about making sure your infrastructure is right before even all the shift left discussion comes in. Can you give us a little perspective of how the cloud infrastructures have changed over time, and what are the surprises or some of the things and the challenges associated with that?
Sure. So I think that in a traditional environment, everything is already on-prem, right? So you probably would have your CI/CD pipeline built out there, hopefully, if you have good DevOps practices built in. And you probably wouldn't have some of the same concerns that you would have in cloud, simply because well, let me back up here a minute. In cloud, there's often the temptation to want to move directly from non-production to production, which is not a best practice. There should always be a check, a review, an auditable spot where any code that's been developed has a separate set of reviewers who then review that and then can promote the code and make sure that that's perfectly, completely reviewed before it goes to production, right? Now, obviously, infrastructure as code is a very big component of that, because if you are going to have some standard templates, some sort of a standard that you're going to follow in terms of the configurations that need to be there in cloud, you have to take into consideration that your on-prem requirements may not necessarily match what the CSP that you're in are going to require. And some examples of that would be, maybe on-prem you have some specific controls in place to always require encryption, or always require even a specific type of customer managed key encryption, right? Maybe you have your TLS set up properly there. Maybe you have, a lot of these other controls that the cloud service provider is going to allow you to either opt in or out of. So that's one of those things where automation comes into play, because first of all, you have to find a centralized method of managing all of these controls such that you can actually see, hopefully in one pane of glass, what you're dealing with there. And second, you have to make sure that you actually prepare the template, hopefully, infrastructure as code, that has the parameters that need to be inputted, whether it's for encryption, whether it's for server access logging, whether it's for any of these things prior to actually creating a resource, that those are all inside your template and that it will not deploy without that. So, that's one of the areas that I think it's very easy to want to have a temptation of wanting to do things manually. But if you do, you have the option of toggling on or off within your cloud service provider, versus having infrastructure as code, automation, your pipelines actually built out as part of your infrastructure as code that has a set format that needs to be followed.
Okay, so I heard the one pane of glass to give you a vision about what's going on with your infrastructure. Joe talked about having a vision and a continuous perspective of how your apps are being uploaded, and the whole CI/CD process. Robesh, from there, any other particular concerns in this process of understanding the OWASP area and the MITRE attack type concepts?
No, I think like Joe was mentioning, using the risk-based approach and kind of coming up with a strategy to determine, like, hey, you don't want to roll out the change across all of your components, right? So you identify your high risk or high visibility services to transform, and you apply the principles from OWASP. But the one great thing about OWASP is, for anybody that's new, OWASP has a lot of flagship projects that can help you navigate this, like from gathering requirements to implementing these changes, how to train your developers. And MITRE has similar guidance on how to validate different types of services in different architectures, whether you're based in cloud or whether you're based in on-prem. And there are a lot of good things that you could derive from both cloud security and application security and implement in different places. Like Lori was mentioning, infrastructure as code, you could apply a lot of the secure by design, secure by default principles that OWASP advocates for into building your cloud infrastructure. At the same time, the API-based approach that we see with a lot of the cloud service providers is something that could be incorporated into implementing software security in your applications.
Okay, so that's interesting, because Joe, from the standpoint of setting up different clients, having a actual plan in place, the OWASP plan and the MITRE attack concepts, is that something that we go ahead and alert them that these principles are changing on an ongoing basis, and that you should have a component of automation, because once a year manual pen testing, they won't be able to solve some of the issues that are going to come up in the future.
Yeah, so as we educate the workforce around enterprises in the in the enterprise commercial markets or SMB, we talk about OWASP, we talk about the general terms of MITRE framework attack, MITRE attack framework and other frameworks as well, like NIST and so forth as well, and cyber kill chain, right? So we, as we educate our workforce, we not only provide them the information, but we continuously give them the ability to get updated through our website and blogs and stuff. I mean, like a lot of these, let me just clear this. A lot of the resources in this segment are always craving for information, right? Because that's how you keep up with becoming a really good practitioner in general. Um, while we provide educational information as a trusted advisor, it's better to keep up with the open source groups like OWASP and things like that, and be in a continuous, to retain that information in a continuous manner. Like Lori and Rupesh mentioned, right? As time goes by, priorities kind of shift, and so does the type of the list that has been maintained in the top 10, 2017 to 2021, and next year there will be another change, and those changes are natural, right? And it evolves with time, and the type of attack motions are changing in the market. I mean, if you look at from the hacker's point of view, right, it is run like an organization, right? There is a madness to that methodology. There's targeted attacks, nation state attacks. Then there's, they're also utilizing same tools as we utilize to defend it and slow down the attacks. Or they're also utilizing AI. They're also doing, SSRF as a launch point to do spray and pray. All of that exists on the other side as well. So we have to be very cognizant. This is a continuous exercise, and it is one of those things like, we just have to have a better discipline on the baseline side of things, so we can be modular on the upper stream, where we can be very agile to go faster, right? The more we automate, the better we understand, and the better we understand, the better proactive steps we can take to slow it down and mitigate some of the attack vector, the vector itself, right?
Well, that kind of leads into what Prancer's has been doing up to now. Is we break it into stages. The first part is always to discover.
Right.
Lori, to your point, understanding what the infrastructure is and the IAC is looking like, understanding the inventory of APIs and the natures of those. Then we actually put it into our attack emulation and technology, which actually runs OWASP and runs a MITRE attack frameworks through it, and also our researched library of different tools or different vulnerabilities that are happening, which gives it a continuous review of ways to understand the vulnerabilities, which ends up putting it into our risk assessment intelligence tool that determines what exactly is going to be what's the highest, what's the medium. Most important, it eliminates most of the false positives that drive all your development group crazy. That brings it into an actual remediation stage, which helps with Robesh. You were talking a lot about the shift left, be able to tie into fixing things before it gets into the actual cloud. As Prancer's, it does that, and then certainly provides the reporting, so you can track all the things. That seems to be the one thing that everyone always talks about, is that we don't know how many more we have to fix. So all this adds up to the continuous review of both the infrastructure and the apps, creating that kind of safe zone that Lori and Robesh are looking for on a constant basis. Lori, is you want to give us a last perspective of some people are talking about mobile apps. I'm sure those are starting to become more of an issue. People want to talk a little bit about how you control an uncontrolled access. Any vision on that?
That is a really good question. I think mobile is a big challenge for pretty much any organization in the world right now, right? One of the reasons for that is simply because the actual components are different from what you would ordinarily find in any other system, right? So, I mean, there are certainly options that you have. There are tools out there that you have to use that as an endpoint too, and to apply some protections and to make sure that it adheres with your organization policy. But some of the challenges with those are going to be things like your mobile app is obviously always going to be separated from the actual infrastructure that you have built out for your organization, right? Whereas possibly your other systems aren't. So I mean, certainly there are some best practices to put into place. Like anytime that you're developing APIs, you would always want to make sure that you scope those down to least privilege. You would want to make sure that, anything you're implementing there, that as you've and others have pointed out, I believe, API security is of utmost importance. What can you do in terms of well, obviously cloud APIs would be a little bit different, but there are options to maybe for a cloud API to scope down the resource policy and to make sure that you have it behind the WAF and stuff like that. But the issue with mobile apps is that at times you don't have the same capabilities or the same options for guardrails that you have for some of the other systems. So yes, there are certainly some guardrails that you can put into place and some best practices to be followed, but I think that's going to continue to be a challenge.
Robesh, you got any point of view on that, or the upcoming zero trust type of initiatives that are happening out there, and how we actually going to be able to deal with a whole new way of doing business?
Yeah, yeah. I think on the mobile application side, there are some good guidelines from OWASP. They have their own mobile application verification standard, and there is a security checklist as well that should help you establish some security baselines for your application. And like Lori was mentioning, um, with the mobile applications, you encounter new type of threats for your services, your backend services and API services that are integrated there. And with the zero trust, even if you want to implement zero trust, I think that going back to the fundamental, taking a defense in depth approach, like where you're adding controls within your ecosystem in multiple places, where you are able to monitor the effectiveness of a control, like Joe was mentioning, by implementing logging best practices and then making sure that your control is being effective and tested regularly. I think following these practices and these steps will help you implement like zero trust principles much easier. But I think without doing this, making a shift directly to zero trust might be a challenge.
Yeah. Okay. Well, it's that's one of the advantages of that we've been focusing on, is making sure with automation doesn't necessarily work really well in a zero trust environment. Ours actually is designed to deal with all the different steps associated with zero trust. In fact, it's the only one that does work that way. It's a fantastic tool that we'll show you guys later on. Joe, you want to take us out on any kind of last minute discussion or last minute point of view on what the OWASP and the MITRE attack? What's the end? What people should be doing right now?
Yeah. So, take away from some of these conversations, obviously with automation, with Prancer and things of that nature, with pen testing as code, but going down to the fundamentals, right? Plan your strategy, build your defense, monitor logging and monitoring and observability, understanding metrics, tracing, all of those things, and build a threat model around your stack, around your application, around your organization. Look at it from a stencil perspective, right? You got to layer on top of each other to build an effective program, right? You have to become an effective operator. And in order to become that way, you got to start with strategy, which also means you have to understand your current state, then build all of these components around it, determine the threats, take features and capabilities from all these product stacks, right? Stitch it all together, and then look at it from a heat map perspective. What does my ASM look like? How do we build structure around it? how do we stitch, and then continuously evolve, right? It's rinse and repeat, becoming really good from a discipline perspective. You're not gonna, again, if it's targeted, there's various ways to go about it into the organization. You're not gonna mitigate most like you're not gonna mitigate everything, but it's all about reducing, right?
Yeah.
Reducing the attack surface, reducing that attack lateral movement, all of that come into play, right? It's so think through that motion. I think if you start thinking through that motion from engineering all the way to decision makers, or C levels or whatever, right? You run a very effective program from that standpoint.
Lori, any final perspectives or points of view from this topic for our audience?
Yes, I think zero trust is huge right now, which several people have already pointed out, right? Zero trust is absolutely probably every organization's main focus right now. And the reason for that is that, actually several reasons. One, we always have in any organization high turnover. We always have mostly people with good intentions, but there can always be that person who even inadvertently makes a mistake or set out to, have a particular configuration because it was most maybe the easiest and quickest thing to do at the time without thinking through the risks. And it is extremely important that we do apply a zero trust mentality, realizing that, all of us can make mistakes. It's not necessarily to indicate that anybody is trying to be malicious, but anybody can engage in a malicious activity or be hacked and be then the vehicle for a hacker to be able to, discuss and come up with strategies for how they are going to be able to attack your most valuable components, most valuable systems. So it's very important, yes, zero trust at every level, whether it's a network, whether it's your infrastructure, whether it is your, internal components, there's always the requirement to have a zero trust mentality there.
Okay. Robesh, from your standpoint, zero trust is going to rewrite everything, right?
Yeah, no, I think it's gonna enhance your existing security posture for sure, and I think the amount of work it takes for your organization or any specific team that is looking to implement it will depend on your current posture. And yeah, I think discovery is really important of trying to understand what your current state of organization is, and you apply the OWASP frameworks, you apply the lessons from MITRE, you do threat modeling, you work with different teams, and then you start identifying like, hey, what do you need to do to get to a zero trust model? And I think along the way, like using the threat modeling approach as way of keeping up with, hey, what are the most common threats that are affecting your organization? What are the threat actors that might be targeting your organization? Will help you keep up with like, hey, what is impacting your organization very specifically, not just like what's happening out there.
All right. Hey, Joe, you wanted to kind of have a final word on zero trust and some of the OWASP and MITRE attacks and how those are all going to change in the future.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of these frameworks have been in existence for a long time, right? In some fashion, more formally recently than before. But I will say, from a zero trust perspective, it is a journey. It is not a product, right? It's products, features, and capabilities drive drive towards that journey to get to that zero trust kind of emotion. And I and what I want to talk about is like a little bit is this is not something you just put one program, small little project together to get it done. It's a multi-year program, depends on the size of the organization, the complexity of your applications. There's so many elements of zero trust. There's identity and access management. There's SIM. There's endpoint. There's all these domains that all have to come together to get to that journey, right? And get to that outcome. Um, Again, so even with us at Lightstream, from an organization perspective, we are services. we help organizations on their zero trust journey. And we have our methodology where we not only take telemetry from Prancer and things like that, other tools, all tools, but again, it's a people, process, technology kind of a journey that is literally at some organization, it's going to be like 5 years or maybe even 10 years, right? It depends how complex the organization is, right? And what kind of black hole you gotta dig out of. Not that these black holes were created intentionally, it just happened with evolution and time, right? So again, what I would say is, a lot of these frameworks are part of all of these things, including threat modeling around it, because all these things kind of stitch together to get to that outcome, if that makes sense.
Well, it does, and it makes sense to a lot of our audience here. They've talked about it's really good to hear from peers, Lori and Robesh, how you're dealing with using OWASP and MITRE attacks and being able to incorporate that into your strategies with your security operations, healthcare or insurance, as digital payment. Each one of them, I'm sure your days don't quite look the same. So it's great to hear your perspective on what how you're using all this to make things different for us. Um, and some of the discussions that came up, Prancer, if you have a choice, if you want to be able to try that, I will actually put a link in the our LinkedIn page for you to see for yourself how our continuous automation actually does a great shift left type of protection, being able to go and have a single pane of glass and vision for your organization, being able to go after our new zero trust system and being able to drive or results, because everything's changing with zero trust. Any coyote scans in the past are going to be very questionable whether they can work through the new zero trust environment. So we're an integral part to that. And with that, I will thank our speakers. Thanks so much for joining us today. We are, we hit hard. We wanted to deliver some key facts. Looks like we did some great tips for people. And we want people to understand, that there is a way, some fantastic new ways to go do their vulnerability risk assessments with Prancer. With that, I'll sign off, and thanks so much for everyone for joining us. Thanks our audience for joining us. If you please share this if you want to send it over to one of your buddies in the industry. Thanks for the ones who asked questions as well. So we will go ahead and shut it down. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.